Hey everyone, welcome back to another hour of A Song of Ice and Fire. Um, I, even though it tends to be more like an hour and a half, I'm joined by my co-host, who I think it's probably best if she explains what's going on.
Hello, everyone. You are. I am the person formerly known as Lindbergh, but today, for the purpose of this stream, I am Death, courting Jaime Lannister.
Yes, the stranger, as they call it in the books, or the Bride of Frankenstein, also I think is what you kind of look like a little bit.
I have never seen The Bride of Frankenstein, but I'll take it.
Okay, let me make sure that I had yes, okay. I had tagged everyone that needs to be tagged, and now we can get started. Oh man, I love how I put Jamie loses a hand, two A's and two D's. Awesome.
Oh, wonderful
Okay, so
spelling.
this chapter, let me move it over here like this. Okay, so for this chapter, this is about halfway through, not really, it's about probably about a third or a quarter of the way through A Storm of Swords. Jaime Lannister, known as the Kingslayer, who has been up until this point kind of like a villain for the Lannisters. You know, he threw Bran off of a tower, a child, because he was having sex with his sister. Understandable. He has been like a super good swordsman. He's been called the Kingslayer. I'm just catching people up for who like this is not for completely new people, but just for some people. And at this point, he has lost his hand. It just got cut off last chapter. The other main character we're going to be dealing with a lot is Brienne, who is like kind of like an ugly woman, but a good knight. Um, who doesn't like him? And they are with a bunch of mercenaries called the Bloody Mummers. Anything I'm forgetting?
Catelyn was with Brienne when Renly was murdered, and as a result, Brienne went into Catelyn's service. And when Catelyn found out her sons had been murdered, she sent Brienne with Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, to King's Landing for a trade for her daughters. And on the way, they were waylaid by Sir Vargo Hoat and the Bloody Mummers, also known as the Brave Companions.
Right. Yeah, I forgot they're called. They call themselves that. That's so funny. I have one hair that's sticking up, guys. Okay. Yeah, no, that's I forgot they called themselves that. That's pretty funny. Yeah, and so one of the big themes we're going to look at in this chapter and through Jamie throughout it is oaths and what they mean and how you're supposed to maintain them and like uh, what do you do when they conflict? Because that was actually kind of a big problem with him, and we'll talk about. I don't think we get into it in this chapter, but with the king he killed, Arius. It was Arius, right?
Aerys,
Yes, Arius.
yeah, Aerys
Aerys.
the Second, Aerys the Mad.
Aerys the Mad. Yes, the Mad King. And then the other thing I think it's worth talking about before we get into it and what we're going to be looking at is identity. So a little bit ago, a few months ago now, me and Limburg for the book club of my other channel. If you're watching this just from YouTube, and for if you're from part of our Discord, you remember this. Was the Queen of Atolia, in which a character loses his hand, but like it doesn't really affect his sense of identity that much, and it's a much poorer version of this. Um, by the way, that pink thing Limburg is holding is
Sorry,
that
that's
is
my fly swatter. It might make an appearance.
yes,
Even death needs to swat flies.
she is the bringer of death in character.
Indeed.
um and yeah, we're okay. So and that's the thing is that we often have different pillars of our identity, and it can be very destabilizing to lose one of those and be like, okay, who are we now? Our identity becomes really rigid, especially people who have been through like child abuse or abuse of some kind, or just had parents who were very difficult. Their sense of self, like one of the things I think is really important is like my intelligence and like if I'm not intelligent, then really who am I as a person? What's the point? And we all have these pillars, but sometimes they're more rigid than others. And a big one for Jaime has been that he is an excellent swordsman. He is like the best in the realm. And so, like, who is he going to be without his hand?
Yes. And we will actually touch a bit on that in the chapter itself.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things to think about. Any other thoughts before we jump in?
No.
Okay.
Let the text speak. Let the man die.
There we go. We'll see how this goes. Okay, so would
I
you
like that
like?
you have the properly formatted text for once.
I always do. This is Google Books. This is an entirely legal copy. It's working fine.
Oh, okay. Yes, of course. Of course.
I like Google Books better than like Kindle, where I actually like own the books, because like this you can
Oh,
copy and
yes.
paste. It's easier to highlight and stuff, so it's easier. It's more
I like
convenient to
Google
have it.
Books as well.
Okay, you may begin, Milady Death.
Yes, but would you mind scrolling down a little bit more?
Here, I'll change the size because what happens is there we go.
Would you? Oh, it's the page. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Would you mind not highlighting? I'm sorry, I'm annoying.
Okay, no problem. Would you like? You can just read from your copy if you would like.
I am high maintenance. Well, I don't know when you want me to stop then. Fucking flies! Do you see this?
You guys, the thing is, she's in.
Jesus.
For those who don't know, Limburg is in Sweden, and they don't have screens on their windows, which to me as a Floridian is like bizarre. I don't know how you guys haven't gotten malaria yet, but
I feel like
yeah,
I
yes.
must defend my country's honor because you must understand that we only have about 2 months every year where we have flies. So the rest
That's
of the year, everything is cold and dead.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Limburg is ice, and I am fire. You know, in terms of our homelands, we are the. We have a song, and our song is "Back in Black," according to what she looks like today.
So everyone, I'm so sorry, but if I have a fly crawling on my face, can you please ignore it? As I will
You know, it'd
try
be
to.
hilarious if
As
we
I
made
will try to.
intros. If we made an intro for this series, but each time it was a different pop culture song matched to what goes on in the like the chapter. Like I don't have enough song knowledge for that to work, but it would be really funny. Like when one of the characters comes back
It
from the
could be
dead, it would
fun.
be like Back in Black or something like that. Oh, hey Val.
Oh.
Val. Oh, I should announce this for everyone who's here right
Hello,
now. We are
Val.
going to be doing, along with Courtney, where she is, we're going to be doing our first reread of Game of Thrones next week. So, if you would like to follow along with
Show
that in the
up,
Discord.
be there, or be square.
I've never heard that one. That must be a Swedish saying.
I'm sorry. The AT is called and they want the references back.
Yeah, so if you want to follow along, and if not, also we now have a channel for these videos. It's just going to be these videos re-uploaded along with the rereads. That should be in the description of this video. I'm trying not to say too many things that have to be cut, so let's go and just get started.
Right. His hand burned. Still, long after they had snuffed out the torch they used to sear his bloody stump, days after, he could still feel the fire lancing up his arm and his fingers twisting in the flames, the fingers he no longer had. He had taken wounds before, but never like this. He had never known there could be so much pain. Sometimes, unbidden, old prayers bubbled up
Yeah, what's
from
it?
his lips,
Bubbled
prayers he
from.
learned as a child and never thought of since, prayers he had first prayed with Cersei kneeling beside him in the sept at Casterly Rock. Sometimes he even wept, until he heard the mummers laughing. Then he made his eyes go dry and his heart go dead, and prayed for this fever to burn away his tears. Now I know how Tyrion has felt. All those times they laughed at him.
Okay.
After the
So,
second,
oh, okay, yeah, no, good. I think okay, so there's a
it's
lot to work
whenever.
with here.
Let's just explain. Whenever Will interrupts me, it's because we have a time delay. Because I am in filthy Europe and he is in clean America.
Exactly. We have broadband internet here, and over there they still use stones as currency, like with little like
Well, it's not
runes on
called
them.
broadband; it's called fiber.
Okay, so there's a lot of interesting things being done here. Now, one thing that just jumped out at me is that we, for our book club, are reading Savor's Champion, which is an absolutely awful book where the main character never thinks about anyone but themselves. And so, right off the bat, I like that he related this back to one of his family members and somebody else. You know, like now I know how Tyrion felt all those times they laughed at him. Um, that's just a nice little thing to do. You tend to think of your siblings and other people around you and relate their experiences to yours. I like that this feels very distant. It feels very. Martin has this way of like stating facts one after another, but they build the character in terms of how they are thinking. And like that's all that this first paragraph really is still. Notice also this is one long paragraph. There's no period or no one long sentence, no periods. Days after he could still, and then notice the way this builds in power too, which we've talked about before. Still, long after they had snuffed out the torch that used to sear his bloody stump. Days after, he could still feel the fire lancing up his arm and his fingers twisting in the flames, the fingers he no longer had. Um, if I had one note, I don't love the fingers he no longer had, but that might just be a concession to clarity, and that you don't want them to think that like they were burning his hand. You know what I mean? But I like the idea, the phantom limb pain that we're already getting there of like this is his, but it's in a fire. Um, yeah.
I'm gonna have to call Pistolas on that, Will, because I actually like the fingers he no longer had because it's like a little punctuation to the point. It's like the rule of three. First he counts up the ways it hurts, and then it's like in the fingers he no longer has because he's talking about his hand as if it's still attached to his arm.
No, again, I agree with that. I just I don't know. I don't love it, but it's something I would put in a book, so
Personally,
maybe
I
I shouldn't
do.
complain. Okay, hand crossbolos. Um,
Yeah, oh yeah. Dear Lord, we have a new one. Shouldn't we be crossing swords?
yeah, sword stolas maybe. Okay. Yeah, I really like this paragraph. I think it immediately gets you into there's a distance between how Jaime is feeling and what's going on, so that kind of is mirrored here. There's also Martin does this thing all the time in chapters where he'll start a chapter midway through a thing and then do that for like a few pages and then flash back to what's happened between the last chapter and this chapter, which is how he manages the length of the book. And so this is kind of an example of that.
I would like to take and direct a little bit of attention towards, especially the last Jamie's thoughts, the italicized paragraph, because usually what you see authors do is that they would write, "Oh, he felt ashamed. The shame burned in him like fire," or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Martin has a way of writing internal thoughts that are responding to the feeling the character is feeling. So it lets the reader hear the thought and intuit what the character is feeling, which is, in my way, a much more clever way of writing internalized emotion than just stating it outright.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's something when I first read A Song of Ice and Fire, I immediately stole for my own writing. But like italicized inward thoughts, especially me who I have a constant inner monologue, it really resonates with me of like, okay, this is what they're thinking. Another thing that I actually like here, which we'll talk about more, is then he made his eyes go dry and his heart go dead and prayed for the fever to burn away his tears. This is Jaime going away inside, which is an actual phrase he'll use later, but it's kind of a
Mm.
hint already at the trauma he went through with Eris. And also, this is again Martin being a little poetic. He prayed for his fever to burn away his tears. Like, there's such a Martin has such a like delight in language sometimes that I think is like genuinely a little clever. But yeah,
It is.
okay. Do you want to read the next part?
Yes. After the second he fell from the saddle, they bound him tight to Brienne of Tarth and made them share a horse again. One day, instead of back to front, they bound them face to face. The lovers, Shagwell sighed loudly. Oh, what a sight they are! 'Twould be cruel to separate the kind knight and his lady. He laughed that high, shrill laugh of his. Ah, but which is the knight and which is the lady? If I
So
had
already
my hand.
this is a reoccurring theme that'll come through is like the knight and his lady in reference to Brienne and Jaime, and like it's very self-consciously there, or not self-consciously, it's very explicitly kind of there, and Brienne and Jaime are, I think I've mentioned this before, but they're an inversion of Beauty and the Beast, in that the man is beautiful but a beast inside, and Brienne is a beast outside but beautiful inside. And that's just a thing that Martin really likes playing with. So we are already kind of setting a framework of chivalry. And that's kind of cool.
Oh, and
Over.
yeah, anyone who hasn't read the books, we have already quite been introduced to how unladylike and how ugly Brienne is. So he is rather mocking the both of them.
Yeah, and he finds her kind of to be foolish. Jaime does. All right, you can read the next part.
And it's also quite interesting because his comment sort of plays on how Brienne's part she plays. She is a lady, but she is not a knight. She can never be a knight, but she wears a knight's garb and she acts like a knight. So she blurs those lines. And Jaime, having lost his hand and not being a sword fighter anymore, is he
Yeah,
a knight or is he a lady now? It's really talking about
exactly.
gender
Yes.
roles.
Yeah, masculinity, and he feels emasculated by losing his hand, because that's, if you define masculinity by your ability to fight, then he can't really fight anymore. So yeah, no, that's something that's also going to come out through the chapter. Okay, you can read the next part.
If I had my hand, you'd learn that soon enough, Jaime thought. His arms ached and his legs were numb from the ropes, but after a while none of that mattered. His world shrunk to the throb of agony that was his phantom hand, and Brienne pressed against him. She's warm, at least, he consoled himself, though the wench's breath was as foul as his own. No? Okay.
I think it's interesting. The breath thing, I think, is kind of interesting, because it's a good sensory detail to put in. And again, there's still this sort of the sensory details here are really evocative without it necessarily saying like he felt like this or he felt like that. But they're still very evocative, and there's also, again, that kind of distance here where Jamie's like always been kind of like a witticism type character, and so he still has that even as he's lost his hand.
Mm-hmm. And indeed, Alexis, I too really appreciate a female character who is statedly not beautiful, and though she is performing a man's role, we won't see her described as, because usually if we get a female character that has manly traits, we will usually see her being butch and adapting the male identity, the male toxic identity. We'll see her laughing jovially with the males, and we'll see her like making sexist comments about women. She will usually be gay. I appreciate that Brienne really breaks the mold. She is a very sympathetic character through and through. And her arc is really about her struggling to find her identity and being sort of the outsider because she cannot fit into either traditional gender role.
Yeah, very much
And
so. That's
it's one of the
something.
reasons why she is such a good and interesting character we don't usually see in fantasy.
Yeah, she doesn't disrespect the female role in the world, in her world. It's more just that she can't quite fit into it, and so she feels like a little sad about that. Okay, you can read this next part.
His hand was always between them. Urswick had hung it about his neck on a cord so it dangled against his chest, slapping Brienne's breast as Jaime slipped in and out of consciousness. His right eye was swollen shut, the wound inflamed where Brienne had cut him during their fight, but it was his hand that hurt the most. Blood and pus seeped from the stump, and the missing hand throbbed every time the horse took a step.
I've always thought this was like the grossest thing, but it's so evocative too, and it's so cruel. I always just thought that was a great detail.
Mm-hmm. And usually the mention of pus is quite visceral because we know that once a wound is full of pus, that's bad. It's inflamed. It's
Hmm. And like he's
possibly
not.
infected.
Yeah, they're not putting it back. Like they're not sewing that fucker back on. Not that they could anyway, but
No.
um. So I think the way we should do this, so we don't keep having running into each other, is that you can just read the full page, and then if we want to talk about it, we can. But we'll just wait till the end.
Okay. His throat was so raw he could not eat, but he drank wine when they gave it to him, and water when that was all they offered. Once they handed him a cup, and he quaffed it right away, trembling, and the brave companions burst into laughter so loud and harsh it hurt his ears. "That's horse piss you're drinking, Kingslayer," Rorge told him. Jaime was so thirsty he drank it anyway, but afterwards he retched it all back up. They made Brienne wash the vomit out of his beard, just as they made her clean him up when he soiled himself in the saddle. One damp, cold morning, when he was feeling slightly stronger, a madness took him, and he reached for the Dornishman's sword with his left hand and wrenched it clumsily from his scabbard. "Let them kill me," he thought, "so long as I die fighting, a blade in hand." But it was no good. Shagwell had come hopping from leg to leg, dancing nimbly aside when Jaime slashed at him.
Um. So one thing I like is that this is really quite humiliating in a way that a lot of authors would not allow their characters who they identify with for it to happen to them. This is like
Absolutely.
this is a really awful thing that happened. I remember the first time I read this just being so it having such an effect on me, like reading it, and it's so it's just I remember it being very affecting. Right now I'm viewing it from like a very far distance. But I mean, and
Mm.
it's one of these things where Jaime doesn't stop to think to himself a lot. It's not something where he's telling you how he feels. There's just kind of a statement of fact that builds in you the feeling that Martin wants you to understand that Jaime is going through. And there's also a little bit of a sense of surrealism about it because you are so
Hmm.
distant and such weird things are happening.
And you can really get the sense of how this shames him, and just reading it, because you don't usually get to read about these things. You're actually a bit uncomfortable. It
Yeah.
feels like you are watching in on a situation that you shouldn't see. You get that sort of Fremdschirmen effect, which is really clever because it makes you also relate even more to Jaime. You kind of feel his shame.
Yeah, and one of the best ways to make you like a character that's otherwise unlikable is you just make them eat shit. Like, I always use the example of Iron Man. Tony Stark in the first movie immediately has to eat a ton of shit, which makes you go like, oh, okay, I'm on his side now, or at least he's more likable than he used to be. There's kind of a ritualistic like shaming and rebirth or something a little bit from it, but yeah, and then just the mocking again, there's a lot of like subtle mocking of him as a the reinforcement of him and what his hand meant, and now he can't even fight.
Hmm. Hello, Otto.
Hey, forgot how much I enjoyed Lindbergh's narration. Well, she upped the ante today also with her costume, so um
A lot of authors we read aren't willing to put their characters through the mud like this because self inserts need to be perfect. Yes, that is a very good point.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're like Mel Gibson, the character that you are like associating and identifying with, you don't want to go through this because you yourself don't want to go through this. And that's one of the things that makes Martin's writing feel more real at times, is because you do feel like, he isn't the author surrogate. This is just a person in the world you're looking at, and that helps the world as
Mm-hmm.
a whole.
Indeed.
Um,
Hi, Leanne. Leanne? Leanne? I'm sorry if I butcher your name. I am but a poor foreigner.
indeed. Again, they use stones as currency. Okay, here we go.
Oh, indeed. Polished stones. He staggered forward, hacking wildly at the fool, but Shagwell spun and ducked and darted until all the mummers were laughing at Jamie's futile efforts to land a blow. When he tripped over a rock and stumbled to his knees, the fool leapt in and planted a wet kiss atop his head. Rorge finally flung him aside and kicked the sword from Jamie's feeble fingers as he tried to bring it up. "What the mule thinking, Claire?" said Vargohout. "But if you try that again, I will take your other hand, or perhaps a foot." I'm really sorry, you have to look at me while I do that voice. Jamie lay on his back afterwards, staring at the night sky, trying not to feel the pain that snaked up his right arm every time he moved it. The night was strangely beautiful. The moon was a graceful crescent, and it seemed as though he had never seen so many stars. The king's crown was at the zenith, and he could see the stallion rearing, and there was the swan, the moon maid, as shy as ever, was half hidden behind a pine tree.
So, one thing me and Limbrick had said before is that Hote is like both awful and kind of funny at the same time. Like he is
Mm,
such a grotesque character. There's and like it's pitch perfect. In another book, it would just come off as very cartoony, but here it comes off as more like one of those cartoons that you watch as a child that's weirdly upsetting, like those old
mm.
Mickey Mouse kind of cartoons where everybody's like. That's my
Yeah,
impression
he's
of
kind
it.
of pathetic, and everyone laughs at him, and he compensates for it by being just utterly vicious. We haven't said so yet in this chapter, but he is very known for liking to chop off limbs.
Yeah, that's his thing. One thing is that, and I like this. Okay, but if you try it again, I shall take your other hand or perhaps a foot. So the thing about it is that sometimes when characters lose everything in a book, it's like almost a sense of strength. Like, oh, you can't. What else can you do to me? I've lost everything, right? But here it's like, no, you don't get that safety. You don't get that emotional release. Things can always get much worse. And that is something that keeps Jamie feeling vulnerable versus empowered by this loss.
Indeed.
And it's also a very that's how like abusers work too, even though this is like more less subtle than that. But it's like, no, you don't want to escalate the situation because things can always get worse no matter how bad they are now. Excuse me.
Indeed. And I think
um
knowing Jamie is such a blunt and warlike character, to have him sort of lie back and look at the stars, you kind of get a sense of the extremity he's in just through that simple motion. Like, he is not a character that would care normally.
Yes, and again, it adds to the kind of surrealism of the scene, and that you have a moment of beautifulness helps emphasize the ugliness around it. And there are ways that books we've read. I'm thinking of one called "The Spirit Bears Its Teeth," which is just unrelentingly awful throughout the entire book. That like you never quite get a sense of contrast or a moment to breathe in before plunging back into the emotion.
Mm. It went a
And
bit
so,
too hard in order to make the point. I still
yeah,
appreciate the
exactly.
effort of that book, though.
There's a lot of things I really appreciate about that book. Our review of it will be coming out in like a couple weeks, but I don't know. It's a
Mm.
weird book because the first half is much better than the second half, and you mostly remember the second half.
Mm. Hey,
Okay.
Courtney, same thought. Two minds, one
Jamie
thought.
acknowledging the beauty around him and suffering is a nice touch. Disassociation, perhaps. Yeah,
Mm.
there is a sense, there is a distance between Jamie and what's going on that is mirrored by the narration.
Indeed.
Okay.
Okay. How can a night be beautiful? He asked himself. Why would the stars look down on such as me? Jaime, Brienne whispered so faintly he thought he was dreaming it. Jaime, what are you doing? Dying, he whispered back. No, she said, no, you must live. He wanted to laugh. Stop telling me what to do, wench. I'll die if it pleases me. Are you so craven? The words shocked him. He was Jaime Lannister, a knight of the Kingsguard. He was the Kingslayer. No man had ever called him craven. Other things they had called him, yes. Oathbreaker, liar, murderer. They said he was cruel, treacherous, reckless, but never craven. What else can I do but die?
So already we have exactly, he defines himself by these positions, and these are the pillars of his identity: knight, kingsguard, kingslayer. This is also like the first interaction of Jaime and Brienne in this chapter, and like already we can see them kind of like there's a really good chemistry between the two in terms of them pushing each other and what it means, what their views of the world are. It's one of the character interactions that really adds a lot. I've often said that a lot of fiction is about contrasts. It's about different characters being different ways and what that says, what the author wants to say through that. And you know, Brienne and Jaime are, like I talked about earlier, such good contrasts to each other.
Mm-hmm. Their personalities bounce off each other and they kind of reinforce the traits in each other that they both admire, because we see Jaime hitting an all-time low. Like, he has been defeated. All he has left to do is die. And she reminds him that, you can't. You're Jaime. And he's like,
Yeah,
am I
and
still
that's
Jaime?
yeah, exactly. Like, who am I? What does that mean? And this also gets into the concept of courage and what that actually means. Like, is it, you know, again, Martin is always interested in the aesthetics of the thing versus the fundamentals of it. Okay,
Mm,
you can start on this page.
indeed, what the dog. I also love that a lack of courage is the thing that hurts his pride. Yes, that's a kind of little needle that pricks him into, like, I'm gonna live by spite.
Yeah, that is very Jamie too, where he's like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to.
Yeah, it's like, oh, am I gonna be remembered as the guy who kind of cowardly weaked out and just died like a nothing?
Mm-hmm. Hope to Dust says, this chapter is always very difficult to stomach for me. I've read this series a few times now, and for some reason, this chapter always casts a dark shadow over my day. You know, I have things like that where I'll read it and I'll know it's going to get me into a bad emotional mood, and I need to do it before, like, I sleep or nap, because that's how I reset my emotional whatever. This chapter, not now, I view it from too much of a distance, but I remember when I first read it, it had that effect, because you feel like Jaime and you understand. And again, this is not a heroic kind of a heroic kind of suffering. This is just, it's pathetic and it's humiliating in a way that we don't like to feel.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so you can read this page.
Live, she said. Live and take revenge. But she spoke too loudly. Rorge heard her voice, if not her words, and came over to kick her, shouting at her to hold her bloody tongue if she wanted to keep it. Craven, Jaime thought, as Brienne fought to stifle her moans. Can it be? I took my sword hand. Was that all I was? A sword hand? Gods be good, is it true? The wench had the right of it. He could not die. Cersei was waiting for him. She would have need of him, and Tyrion, his little brother who loved him for a lie. And his enemies were waiting too. The young wolf who had beaten him in Whispering Wood and killed his men around him. Edmure Tully, who had kept him in darkness and chains, and these brave companions.
So already we can see him explicitly facing like, who am I? What this is forcing a change in him, which is what you want in a character arc, a lot of the time. And yeah, so unless you have anything to
Well,
say, then yeah.
apparently you're quiet.
Oh,
Or is it
that
me
is
that's loud? I have
annoying.
turned my volume down. I can't hear myself.
Hopefully this is better. I end up having to. The reason, by the way, we're offset a little bit, so we're higher on the screen, is because it's easier when I'm editing to go in and put our screens over this one, but then it cuts off the comments that come in at the bottom. It's a video editor thing. But I'll fix it. I'll fix it in post.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah. Here, I'll do Lindbergh's voice. When morning came, he made himself eat. They feed him a mush of oat horse food, but he forced down every spoon. So already we can see like a change in his character. He sounds a little different here already. All right, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Aren't we going to hear your wonderful Cockney, or your wonderful rendition of a Cockney?
That's as much as you guys get for today. Once we launch a Patreon and make millions, you guys can get a full rendition of the book in Cockney.
You can get all Will, all Cockney, forever.
All
Doesn't that
will,
sound
all
wonderful?
cock.
You haven't even asked them about the Swedish pronunciation issue.
Oh, okay. So this is a thing me and Lindbergh were going back and forth on. Do you want me to say the whole name or just the first part?
Oh God! If they want the full scope, you're gonna have to say my whole name.
Well, okay. So,
This is Will being international and
culturally sensitive.
culturally respective. Yeah.
Okay, and this is how. Why don't you say first this Swedish name so that you can show them how you mispronounce it, or actually no, how you do it. You do it correctly, and then I'll do it equally correctly.
Allow me to mispronounce my name. It is Elin Ekblom.
Right. Okay. So, and I've been learning how to say it because I'm culturally sensitive and I care about other cultures. It's Erlen Ekblom. So, in the comments, say which of us did it better, A or B, Limburg or Will. And actually, to get it really authentic, you need to add a little bit of a yodel to it, as though you're saying it from like a high mountaintop, like
as if I'm a cow and you're calling me home.
Erlen Ekblom is the way you pronounce it. There's a certain tonality that you want to hit. So again, just let us know who you think did it better.
Yeah, totally.
We were playing Space Marine 2, and I was learning it.
Yeah, Will killed me by shouting that over and over. I had to fight a boss fight with him just putting that over and over, like a demented Jack-in-the-Box, sort of just popping up.
It was a Carnifex, and we still defeated him through the might of the Emperor upon Holy Terra. But we should read Warhammer books. That would be fun. Except they're all not, like, there's not that many good ones. All right, go ahead.
Awfully masculine.
Warhammer books are great. They're all like Space Marines who have no real personalities because they're designed in world to not have a personality, going around doing epic stuff.
We're so masculine we don't have a personality.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's keep going. I can't remember where you stopped.
He ate
again at evenfall, and the next day, live, he told himself harshly when the mush was like to gag him. Live for Cersei, live for Tyrion, live for vengeance. A Lannister always pays his debts. His missing hand throbbed and burned and stank. When I reach King's Landing, I'll have a new hand forged, a golden hand, and one day I'll use it to rip out Vargo Hoat's throat. The days and the nights blurred together in a haze of pain. He would sleep in the saddle pressed against Brienne, his nose full of the stink of his rotting hand, and then at night he would lie awake on the hard ground, caught in a waking nightmare. Weak as he was, they always bound him to a tree. It gave him some cold consolation to know that they feared him that much, even now.
Good stuff. I like it. It's he's forced to change. He's forced to think about it. I often in my mind when I'm slighted, I'll be like, one day I'll get revenge upon you. One thing I do think it's interesting that Martin does, and spoilers for later, but Vorgohot gets killed off screen by being fed his own limbs by the mountain. And the thing about it is that this is a thing Martin does very explicitly is he will set up really awful characters and then he won't let the reader get the satisfaction of seeing them suffer. They always end up dying in a way that's a little like anticlimactic, and that's one of the ways that I think the books show the ugliness of violence is that it's like it's not actually that usually this is kind of told in like the vengeance wasn't satisfying way, but here it really isn't. Like, these horrible people do these horrible things, and then when they die, it doesn't make the situation better. He doesn't get his hand back. He isn't actually able to have this great moment of revenge.
Yes, and also the thought is kind of like an excuse for him to spur himself on, because when Vargohout actually dies, he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and it was such an absurdly awful punishment that it's like you don't, I mean, like, so for example, I'm sure when Jaime threw Bran off the tower, you're like, I can't wait till he gets his, and like, this is like a punishment for it, kind of, but also not really, and you don't feel good about it. And again, I think that's one of the
No.
ways that Martin constructs his world in a way that isn't just dark, but says something.
Yes, and there will it's more like it's approximating the real world where people might do really bad things for shitty reasons, but they aren't inherently evil. So the way Vargahout dies is kind of like karma. He had it coming to him, and he does come to a very gruesome end, but it's not. You could think that the arc would be that, oh, Jaime, he gets his mojo back and he learns to fight with his left hand, and then he chops Vargo limb from limb, because that
Yes.
is the way we would see it in most most normal fantasy books, because that is how they write character
Yes.
motivations. Whereas here, fate comes in as a little trickster that it is, and characters do usually reap what they sow, but not in the way we think they might. And that
Mm-hmm.
does not make Jamie's vow here any less real or any less true. Like you can just feel how cold his rage is here,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and we don't have any doubt that he would have taken his revenge if he could.
Yeah. Courtney says, it hammers home needless human suffering in an unfortunately realistic way. Martin critiques retributive justice. Yeah, that's it exactly. Like this is one of his
Mhm.
things where it's like violence, retributive violence. It just doesn't feel good, and he denies you the satisfaction of it. I'll read the
Wow,
next.
haha, aren't you Americans? Don't you believe in retributive violence? And
Only
let's not have that discussion here, actually.
only for racial minorities, you godless communist.
Oh
Brienne
yeah,
was
of
always
course.
bound beside him. She laid there in her bonds like a big dead cow, saying not a word. The wench has built a fortress inside herself. They will grape her soon enough, but behind her walls they cannot touch her. But Jaime's walls were gone. They had taken his hand, they had taken his sword hand, and without it he was nothing. The other was no good to him. Since the time he could walk, his left arm had been his shield arm, no more. It was his right arm that made him a knight, his right arm that made him a man. One day he heard Erswick say something about Harrenhal and remembered that that was their destination. That made him laugh aloud, and that made Timian slash his face with a long, thin whip. The cut bled, but beside his hand he scarcely felt it. Why did you laugh? The wench asked him that night in a whisper. Harrenhal was where they gave me the white cloak, he whispered back. Whence great tourney. He wanted to show us all his big castle and his fine sons. I wanted to show them too. I was only 15, but no one could have beaten me that day. Eris never let me joust. So again, explicit identity stuff. He was his hand. there was something. Oh, I think it's hilarious how much he insults Brienne in his inner narration, like a big dead cow. Like I think it's funny because obviously Brienne is supposed to be a character we like, and it's like it's so bitchy from his point of view. It's just one of the things in his
Yeah,
chapters I
and
always like.
it's really commenting on how unfeminine she is. Like she his
Mm-hmm.
frame of reference is Cersei for everything, and Cersei is like the epitome of femininity in many ways. She is the most beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
she is the most reserved, she is very held back, she is a fine lady. And here he is with Brienne that he kind of grudgingly respects, but she's like, oh, she's like a big cow.
It's so funny.
And
It's
he's
also worth
clearly
pointing out.
intimidated by her size, like a big dead cow.
Big dead cow. All right, you can do this page.
Mm. Uh, he laughed again. He sent me away, but now I'm coming back. They heard the laugh. That night it was Jaime who got the kicks and punches. He hardly felt them either, until Rorge slammed a boot into his stump, and then he fainted. It was the next night when they finally came, three of the worst: Shagwell, Noseless Rorge, and the fat Dothraki Solo, the one who had cut his hand off. Zolo and Rorge were arguing who would go first as they approached. There seemed to be no question that the fool would be going last. Shagwell suggested that they would both go first and take her front and rear. Zolo and Rorge liked that notion. Only then they began to fight about who would get the front and who would get the rear. They will leave her a cripple too, but inside, what it does not show. Wench, he whispered as Zolo and Rorge were cursing one another.
Let's go ahead and read a little bit more.
Let them have the meat, and you go far away. It'll be over quicker, and they will get less pleasure from it. They'll get no pleasure from what I'll give them, she whispered back, defiant. Stupid, stubborn, brave bitch. She was going to get herself good and killed, he knew it. What do I care if she does? If she hadn't been so pig-headed, I'd still have a hand. Yet he heard himself whisper, let them do it, and go away inside. That's what he would have done when the Starks had died before him. Lord Rickard cooking in his armour, whilst his son Brandon strangled himself, trying to save him. Think of Rinley if you loved him. Think of Tarth, of mountains and seas, pools and waterfalls, whatever you have on your sapphire isle, think. But Roge had won the argument by then. You're the ugliest woman I've ever seen, he told Brienne. But I don't think I can't make you uglier. You want a nose like mine? Fight me, and you'll get one. And two eyes, that's too many. One scream, and you'll pop one out and make you eat it. And then I'll pull your fucking teeth out one by one.
Okay, so going through this a little bit. So when it was the next night when they finally came, three of the worst. Again, there is such a distance. There is such a matter of fact way in the way that this is described. This like awful thing that they're planning. But that makes it worse instead of just feeling immaterial, which it might in other books. And then we have here we start to understand just how traumatized Jaime was by what happened to him with Aerys. And it's interesting because again we see kind of the role reversal here of like the kind of bonding between them, and that they're gonna he thinks she's also gonna have to kind of go through this thing that he went through.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this is a good time to kind of talk about rape in fantasy, like how rape is often portrayed as the worst thing that can happen to a woman, but also the inevitable punishment she always faces whenever she ends up in the hands of bad men. Citation marks.
Yeah, this is something I've kind of gone back and forth on in the books and how the books treat it over time. I think one thing I read recently that kind of made me think of it a little differently is that it talked about how assault is something that happens to other people in the books, but never to the main characters. And so it's always treated as sort of afar. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who appreciate that it doesn't happen to any of the main characters and that that doesn't become their plot line. So I'm not necessarily sure how you would thread that needle. And I think it's worth pointing out here that like Jaime goes through this extremely humiliating, traumatizing thing that isn't assault, but it's pretty bad all the same. And you know, you wouldn't usually those kinds of humiliating fates are not given to the male character.
That is true. That
Well,
is
how do you
true.
feel about it?
I go kind of back and forth because, in a way, it is sort of, misunderstand me correctly, it is sort of relevant here because Martin has clearly established that this is a world where women's innocence, their seal, sort of, is very important. It is a valuable possession to the woman and to the men around her. So, in this scene particularly, uh, we see Brienne at risk of being assaulted, which is something I don't really like when it's used often, because it's used as sort of character development and other silly things. But we also see her at risk of losing something very tangible that would matter to her. It's not just rape for the sake of rape. Um, and call me a terrible misogynist, but I think it's kind of realistic. I'm sorry.
I think
So
the
I'm
thing about
fine with
it
it. It's uncomfortable to think about, but it doesn't really feel that out there.
I think the thing about it is that there are certain cases in the book where it doesn't feel that out there or unrealistic, and this is one of those. This feels like, you know, these are absolutely awful people. They're gonna again. My issue sometimes is that the my dog is scratching on my door, but I don't want to have to get up and get him. Um, yeah, I know he wouldn't come in
Don't you
earlier,
have a
but anyway,
heart? Why did you close the door?
well, because there's sound. He'll go away after a second. The thing about it is that I think in this case it's fair because again, these are absolutely awful people. You know, I think there are certain cases in the book where you didn't really need to include it here or there. And I think if
Like
he
the
hadn't,
mountain.
yeah, and I think if he hadn't done it as much in other places, it would be more understandable. Or it would not necessarily have a greater impact, but be more unobjectionable. And the other thing, though, I think is that, and this is something we actually talked about yesterday, in a different live stream, but men are never at risk of sexual violence in books like this. And I think it's because they're written by male authors who find that so much more uncomfortable because it's a thing that could happen to them. In that, like, why don't they try to assault Jaime here? That's a very potent way of trying to take away a man's
Oh yeah,
power.
especially to like shame him.
Yeah,
Especially
exactly.
like
Like that.
he's been crippled. He's basically a woman. Why don't they shame him this way? But we also have to consider that they know who Jaime Lannister is. He has a family behind him that would probably, cut their dicks off and feed them to the goats. To quote Shagga. Um, Whereas Brienne's family is much more obscure. Like, they will not feel the
Well,
weight of her name the same way they do with Jaime.
yeah, and actually, that's what he points out in a minute. Like in a minute, the way he stops the spoilers is like by pointing out that actually, no, she's actually worth quite a good ransom. You should not do this.
Yeah.
And again, I
Yeah,
think this is just a
let's keep
case.
going because there's an interesting point to make there
Yeah.
as well.
I do think also though that this is a thing where like it may make sense in this aspect that he is not vulnerable to sexual violence, but there are cases in the book where like it would be more realistic if the men were also at risk of it, and like that's not
There are
necessarily
two
the
instances where the men are assaulted. Once explicitly and once implicitly.
implicitly.
Implicitly. I know words.
Yeah. Okay, you go ahead and keep going.
Where was I?
Oh,
Oh yeah.
oh, you want to know? Like, okay, oh, do it,
Wait.
Rorge.
Oh yeah. Oh, do it, Rog, pleads Chadwell. Without a teeth, you look like my dear old mother, he cackled. And I always wanted to fuck my old dear mother up the arse. Jamie chuckled. There's a funny fool. I have a riddle for you. Shagwell. Why do you care if she screams? Oh, wait. I know. He shouted, Sapphires! As loud as he could. Cursing, Rorge kicked at his stump again, and Jamie howled. I never knew there was so much agony in the world, was the last thing he remembered thinking. It was hard to say how long he was gone, but when the pain spit him out, Urswick was there, and Varga hoped. Himself. These not to be touched, the goat screamed, spraying spittle all over Zollo. We have to be made, you fools! These are worth a bag of sapphires! And from then on, every night, Hote put guards on them to protect them from his own. Okay. About this.
Go ahead. Well, oh, hold on. Go ahead and read the next part because he explains it.
Okay. 2 nights
2 nights
passed in
passed.
silence before the wench finally found the courage to whisper, Jamie, why did you shout out? Why did I shout sapphires, you mean? Use your wits, wench. Would this lot have cared if I shouted rape? Oh, sorry. YouTube, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not a YouTuber, everyone.
This is
know
our
the
fun little literature corner. It doesn't really matter if we get views on this.
You did not need to shout at all. You're hard enough to look at with a nose. Besides, I wanted to make the goat say sapphires. He chuckled. Good thing for you I'm such a liar. An honourable man would have told the truth about the Sapphire Isle. All the same, she said, I thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, the sapphires are just called that because they're like blue. They're not actually rich.
Yeah.
You can go first.
So here we kind of see the Chekhov's gun that I spoke of go off. Because usually we will see a man defending a woman's virtue only because he is the love interest or because he has a claim on her virtue in some way. He is her brother or her father or her love interest. But what Martin does here is kind of that he has a man, Jamie, this bad character, he has her defend her virtue because it matters to her. It doesn't matter to him. He does it for Brienne's sake, with no back thought, no reward to get from it. He just does it because he knows it matters to her.
Yeah,
and that's
I think
why I'm
also
okay with it.
I mean, and the other thing is it doesn't happen, which I think if it had actually happened, sometimes I think also I think authors sometimes don't think about what would be the most interesting choice, and I think it's more interesting for it not to have happened here in terms of how their character goes forward. And if it had happened, I don't know. I feel like that would have been like a little bit much. The other thing I like about this is that
it would kind of make the whole point of Jamie showing that he isn't an entirely bad character and actually caring. It would kind of negate that if you just let her get raped first.
Yeah, no, that's actually very true.
That accomplish.
Yeah, and for her character growth later, it would just kind of muddy the waters, I think, in a way that's not necessarily that interesting from a writing perspective. The other thing I like about this is that we already see Jamie having to adapt how he navigates the world and how he uses his bravery, and that it is a brave thing to shout sapphires there because that hurt him quite a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and put his life at risk. And he's still brave even if he doesn't have a sword. And we already see him beginning to use more of a Tyrion skill set, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And again, it's character growth even on a small scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
Um,
see him slowly starting to puzzle out and figure out what bravery means, and that he can still be brave, even if he
yeah.
isn't brave with a sword. Because Tyrion has earlier in the books kind of remarked that Jaime doesn't think, he just rushes in with his sword. And
Which is
now
funny
we
because,
see that that personality is still there when he doesn't have a sword.
and the thing is, Jamie is actually very intelligent. He just doesn't really need to be before this that much. He like can kind of just get away with his sword, and now he's having to like jog his
Mhm.
brain.
It was his whole life. He
Uh,
didn't have to think. His role was to be the one who rushed in with the sword. And first it
mm-hmm.
backfired on him with Robb Stark in the woods, and then he kind of antagonized the bloody mamas, and they cut his arm off. So now we see him learning, and we see him learning rather quickly,
Mm-hmm. Even if
which
he doesn't
to me is so
necessarily,
much more gratifying than again having a sulk vacation for 3 months.
and then changing off
Again,
screen. That book is like it's not the
ugh.
worst, but it has issues, and this is just
I'm
such a
sorry.
more.
It's a decent book, but yeah, that ruined the entire book for me because I could not take this child seriously.
All
He
right, you can
behaved in
read
a way
this.
that was very unbecoming,
It's just whiny in a way that yeah is just in a book is just not compelling to
hmm
read about.
very
Um,
unswedish of him. God damn it!
Whereas here, when Jamie whines, it's funny because Jamie is such an extra character sometimes. But
hmm
again, there's actual growth and change going on here versus just like
Yeah,
static
and he
character.
can be petty because he's other things too. His pettiness is like the author needling him just a little bit, like you can
Hmm.
make he's also a little pathetic. Everyone's a little pathetic in this world, and it's fun to sort of show that. And
Yeah, I
also
think
it's kind of like on the playground where you're like, oh, I hate that person, that's so stupid, but really you kind of admire them too. You sort of wanted to be their friend.
I was homeschooled, so that didn't happen to me. But I'll accept that as a
Yeah,
metaphor.
yeah, you chuckled as if you got it. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, you go and read the next part.
Oh,
His hand was throbbing.
his hand was throbbing again. The ground. He ground his teeth and said, Alanistar pays his debts. That was for the river and for those rocks you dropped on Robin Ryger. The goat wanted to make a show of parading him in, so Jaime was made to dismount a mile from the gates of Harrenhal. A rope was looped around his wrist, a second around Brienne's wrists. The ends were tied to the pommel of Vargo Hoat's saddle. They stumbled along side by side behind the Cohoric striped horse. Jamie's rage kept him walking. The linen that covered the stump was grey and stinking with pus. His phantom fingers screamed with every step. I am stronger than they know, he told himself. I am still a Lannister. I am still a knight of the King's Guard. He would reach Harrenhal and then King's Landing. He would live, and I will pay this debt with interest.
It's worth pointing out, it's later in the book explained what Vargo Hoat's like whole logic to cutting off his arm was, and that it just wasn't a very good and it left him politically isolated. So it
Mm.
doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it, but he does later on. It makes more sense if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, at
Um,
first it kind of seems to go against the logic of, Jaime is a Lannister,
hmm.
and they know what a Lannister is. They know the Lannisters are the enemy. And Vargo Hoat's mistake is really in calculating his own power because he doesn't quite understand the political game in Westeros.
Yeah,
So in
and
his mind, it makes sense, but later we'll see that it didn't really in the long run.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think that's like it it's not that helps it not feel contrived and like an author fiat thing, which some books have a lot of trouble with, where someone outlines the book and then just writes what they outline, even as it doesn't change. And honestly, Martin maybe needs a little bit more of that energy because he kind of goes off script a lot and will never finish books. But it does make for a much more, organic world.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah, Martin would probably need to, rein it back just a little bit, but
I've said before, I don't like Brandon
yeah.
Sanderson's writing that much, but if he could write the first draft of the books and then Martin just go in and fix everything, that would be a
I
dream to
actually
me.
have an idea. How about we get R. Scott Bakker to finish the novels?
Who?
The guy I sent you excerpts from the book.
Oh, R.
The
Scott Baker. I didn't I didn't understand you when you said it.
Bakker.
Oh, I
It's
thought it
two
was Baker,
K's.
but
It's two K's.
Baker. I don't
Bakker.
Baker. I don't know. I always pronounce it Baker, but anyway, yeah, that would be
Anyway.
good. But I'm sure he's off doing his own things.
Yeah, but he's got the right tone. I think he could write the characters.
Yeah, I think so too. And his writing is quite good from what I've
Yeah.
heard or
Let's
read.
let's make a petition and send it to him.
I mean, look, if nothing else, he should be the one to continue the series once Martin kicks it. Even if Martin said years
Yeah.
ago that he wasn't going to let anybody do that.
Well, he's reaching a frightening age for our sake, so for humanity, he should just
That's
let
what,
it go,
just
man.
hurry it up.
Yeah. Jesus. Instead of making new TV shows that he gets petty and whines about later.
Oh, yeah. I don't. Apparently, they finished
Just
filming on
wait
Night
and
of the Seven
see how
Kingdoms.
long it takes. Yeah, let's wait and see how long it takes until it becomes petty and whiny about a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms because they don't do everything the exact same way he would have wanted to. It's like,
It's actually.
dude, you sat back while they ruined a Game of Thrones, but now you're complaining? What?
I mean, yeah, it's really true. I think maybe he has trauma from that, charitably speaking, that he now is like meh about
Yeah,
the
he's
whole
just
thing, but
complaining
he
about everything in just in case that we go shit.
and like of the problems that the second season of House of the Dragon has, that is not one of the top ones. Like, I don't know because I haven't really watched the season or read too much
Yeah,
about
I
it, but
was
like
gonna
that would not
say,
have.
speaking as someone who hasn't seen it.
Well, from what I understand, one of the big issues is that the battle just doesn't happen at the end of the season, so it's all this build up to nothing,
Oh
like
no,
the
no,
not
the
the
Battle of King's
culmination.
Landing doesn't happen.
Yeah, which would be like my complaint, or like maybe the complaint of like I don't know what happens with Alicent in the last episode is maybe a little bit weirder, but to complain about like the blood and cheese part is like it's just kind of like a little like I understand why as a writer I understand what he's talking about, but also at the same time the bad effects from it haven't happened. So why are you complaining about a small people listening to this don't know what we're talking about. But anyway, let's go ahead and
Yeah, I'm
keep
sorry.
going.
I'm sorry. I thought it was gruesome enough, but that's just me. Anyway, as they approach the cliff-like walls of Black Heron's monstrous castle, Brienne squeezed his arms. Lord Bolton holds the castle. The Boltons are bannermen to the Starks. The Boltons skin their enemies. Jaime remembered that much about the Northmen. Tyrion would have known all there was to know about the Lord of the Dread Fort, but Tyrion was 1,000 leagues away with Cersei. I cannot die while Cersei lives, he told himself. We will die together, as we were born together. The castle town outside the walls had been burned to ash and blackened stone, and many men and horses had recently encamped beside the lake shore where Lord Went had staged his great tourney in the year of the false spring. A bitter smile touched Jaime's lips as they crossed that torn ground. Someone had dug a privy trench in the very spot where he had once knelt before the king to say his vows.
This is very, like specifically unheroic, which Martin likes to do. Because
I
it's
think
like
it's funny.
we have, yeah, it's funny, and it's like one of the things he likes to do, where it's like you contrast the two. Um,
Yeah.
we have the "We will die together as we were born together." This is another kind of pillar of Jaime's identity is his connection with Cersei, and so like that's kind of just mentioning it a little bit. Um, yeah. Okay. Okay, you can read that part.
I never dreamed how quick the sweet would turn to sour. Ares would not even let me savor that one night. He honored me, and then he spat on me. The banners, Brienne observed. Flayed man with twin towers, see? King Rob, sworn men. There, above the gatehouse, grey on white. They flay the dire wolf. Jaime twisted his head upward for a look. That's your bloody wolf, true enough, he granted her, and all those heads to either side of it. Soldiers, servants, and camp followers gather to hoot at them. A spotted bitch followed them through the camps, barking and growling, until one of the Lyseni impaled her on a lance and galloped to the front of the column. I am bearing the Kingslayer's banner, he shouted, shaking the dead dog above Jaime's head. And there is another pet peeve of many people, animal cruelty just for shock effect. And it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of that.
I don't know. I feel like the dog is not enough of a character for you to get the dog died feeling from
And the
it. Like
point
it really.
isn't the point isn't to torture the dog to shock you, but the point of killing the dog is kind of to drive home that, these are truly despicable people, the bloody mamas.
Yeah, and
But
they're
it's
just
also
they're.
kind of building their name because they are the brave companions,
Mm-hmm.
but everyone refers to them as the bloody mamas. And the bloody mamas is like they are they're a show of circus freaks, and they're just completely deranged, the entire lot of them.
Yeah, and,
So
this is a great kind of weird surreal thing for them to do. And
yeah,
it shows their callousness towards life. And I don't know. I think it works here. I don't think it's something where you're like, oh no, the dog, because you didn't know the dog. It was introduced in that paragraph. So
I could
I
see
just
it
don't think.
being something that people take note of, and it sort of melds into their general impression of the book
Um,
in an unfavorable way.
yeah, maybe you might be right about that. I think for
But
me though,
I personally feel like it serves a very straight plot point in this case, and that is specifically to build up the bloody mamas.
hmm. No, I agree. I think in this case it works because it is serving a purpose. It's not just trying to get an emotional response. You're not really even supposed to have an emotional response to it. Like that's the thing is it's just kind of a thing that happens that is gross, but you aren't supposed to feel bad or shocked or anything like that by this point.
I find it just a little bit shocking because who the
Interesting.
fuck
I
does
don't.
that? That poor dog.
Yeah, to me, I don't really know that I'd say shocking. More like it's kind of a little gross and weird. But to me, the Bloody Mummers by this point are so much that thing that this feels just very in character for them.
I love animals.
Uh,
I almost ran off the road the other day because I was trying to avoid a mouse. So it is quite shocking. I mean, I feel that in my chest. Um, but
okay, I
I
think
forgive
it's.
it. Like I will not hold it against the book because I kind of understand why it was a point. Unlike, for example, when we read Slewfoot, where the cat
Mm-hmm,
torture just felt like it was just something to add to the general awfulness, and the cat was a
mm-hmm,
character at that point. It just felt needlessly cruel from normal people as well, like normal people just
mm-hmm,
suddenly string up and torture a cat because oh devil's kitten or something like that.
mm-hmm. Again, I think it's
Yes, we have
something where it's
mice on the
like
road in Sweden, Ben. We have mice
we have
everywhere.
no flies but mice. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I might not include, but I don't mind it being included. Again, I don't really have a strong emotional reaction to it. And
Yeah.
it does serve a purpose. So in the next page, basically they get to Harrenhal and there's some knights there, and he got off his horse and it hurt. Um, let me see. Lannister's wet nurse. Okay.
Where does Roose
Oh,
Bolton
okay.
show up? We need Roose Bolton.
Yeah, he'll show up in a minute. There's some stuff about now. This is interesting. Oh, he repaid our faith with betrayal. So this is by the part where Rob didn't marry a Frey. And
Rob has
Brienne is
married a
like,
Westerling at this point, and the Westerlings are bannermen to the Lannisters.
right, and so they lost the Freys who he had been betrothed. Well, they haven't lost him yet, but they're just kind of pissed about it. Brienne is like, hey, she was trying to send me to give him to wherever, and nobody believes her. Which is fair. Serenus
Yeah,
was
like she could
unmoved. Why would
just
that
it could
trouble
just be
us?
something she said. But honestly, if you think about it for more than a second, why would she have the Kingslayer if the Queen didn't send her? But she's also been tarnished because people assume that she killed Renly.
Yeah, exactly. And like it makes sense. Like it is kind of like a weird. And also, Catelyn was going pretty off script with that. Like one of the reasons I think she sent Brienne is that none of the Northmen would have done that. They would have been like, "That's not a
Yeah.
good idea."
No, that the Northmen don't care because the trade is that she gives back Jaime and she gets her daughters Sansa and Arya, and the Northman basically says that you can't trade a man like the Kingslayer for two girls. It doesn't make sense. If they had not cut off why am I Ned's head, they could have traded the Kingslayer for Ned because that is an equal trade. And
Mm-hmm.
Catelyn tries to argue that to her heart, the girls are worth more than the Kingslayer, but they don't. That's just a weak woman feeling. No one cares about that in the
I,
North.
you know, I've seen a lot of discussion about this, about whether Rob's decision not to give the girls for Jamie is like sexist or not. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Captives are a coin, and the Kingslayer, Jamie, is like an extremely valuable coin to give away in the middle of a war for two daughters who like you could marry off, but like even then aren't necessarily
You
going to be that
you
useful. It's
could
like,
marry them off and get alliances that could get you more soldiers, arguably. Arya is too young, but some people might vote for betrothal. Not likely, but Sansa could be
I think
married off.
Arya is already betrothed actually to one of the Freys. That was one of the
Yeah, but
things I
yeah, but
think.
if they lose the phrase, I mean, okay, that
Uh,
happens before. Oh yeah, so at the time he had the phrase and he was kind of winning, so that makes it even
mm-hmm.
more. It makes even more sense why they would think the Kingslayer is just worth so much more than two daughters.
It's kind of like if you think about it, it's like, okay, we're going to trade this person's an enemy general. We're going to trade for two senators' daughters. Like if you think about this in like real world terms, and like that's just not a good trade. Like in terms of a military asset, he also owes it to the men in his army not to let the Lannisters kill them all. So I don't know. Like again, I think it's more of a strategic decision, but a lot of people kind of feel like it's, the sexist.
It is sexist in its very like at the very heart of it. That is a sexist argument because the world is sexist in that it would value uh, a man more, but also that a man is allowed to take up roles and have skills and have positions that makes him more valuable than a woman.
Yeah, kind of, but they're still children. Like, I think Sansa's 12 at this point, or 15. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even in a
Yeah, but
non-sexist world.
imagine they were Rickon and Bran. They would be heirs, so by default they would be worth more than the girls.
Yeah, but they'd be worth more, but enough to trade over the Kingslayer. It's kind of crazy.
I mean, the Kingslayer is just one man, and he already kind of proved that he isn't a great leader of hosts.
He's he's a strong symbol, and he actually can still lead an army fairly well. He just lost
Yeah,
to
but
Rob.
Bran would have been a strong symbol as well. Like, he's Rob's heir.
Uh, yes and no. Again, I'm not convinced that giving up an enemy general for two children is a good trade.
No, but you can't just disregard that the world is sexist and that leans weight to the decision, even beyond the consideration that Jamie is Jamie and he would be traded for two girls.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that does have a social The weight of the coins is different somewhat in that respect. If they were
Yes.
Bran and Rickon.
And I think it's one of those points where it's good to remember or just to reiterate that portrayal isn't endorsement.
Right.
Martin is portraying a sexist world with sexist values, but he is not saying that these sexist values are correct, that they have seen the light, that they are more right. And I think that is also why he has Catelyn's perspective, uh, showing how she makes the decision to release the Kingslayer, and then we show Brienne's perspective as she ferries this Kingslayer. Like he tries to show the both sides of it, the sides where it doesn't really make sense to save two girls for a Kingslayer,
Mm-hmm.
but also the perspective where it really does make sense. Like this is her daughters, and they are in the line to inherit the North, and and in today's society, it would definitely be an argument whether a Kingslayer was worth like
If
two
I
girls.
was playing, Total War, I would not trade them for Jamie, and that's all. That's my final argument on it. I would not. Trade them for Jamie. That don't think it's a good strategic choice in
Well, if they were
Total War.
political prisoners, Sweden would definitely trade Jamie for two girls.
Um, hmm, I don't know. I don't think so. But anyway, it doesn't really like. I think that's a Pistola's moment. Where I still think
Yeah.
it's not a good trade. All right. We can go ahead and read this part then, because
Mhm.
Bruce Bolton has finally showed up.
Oh, yeah, that's him. Kill him, said another. It's Ned for Ned Starks. Shagwell the fool somersaulted to the foot of the steps in his grey and pink motley and began to sing. There was once a lion who danced with a bear, oh my, oh my. Silence, fool, Vargo cuffed the man. The Kingslayer's not for the bear, he's mine. He is no one's, and should he die, Rose Bolton spoke so softly that men quieted to hear him. And pray recall, my lord, you are not the master of Harrenhal, until I march north. Fever made Jamie's fearless as he was light-headed. Can this be the Lord of the Dreadfort? When last I heard, my father had sent you scampering off with your tail betwixt your legs. When did you stop running, my lord? Bolton's silence was 100 times more threatening than Vargo's Hote's slobbering malevolence. Pale as morning mist, his eyes concealed more than they told. Jamie misliked those eyes. They reminded him of the day at King's Landing when Ned Stark had found him seated on the Iron Throne. The Lord of the Dreadfort finally pursed his lips and said, You have lost a hand. No, said Jamie, I have it here, hanging around my neck. Bruce Bolton reached down, snapped the cord, and flung the hand at Hote. Take this away. The sight of it offends me. I will send it to his lord father. I will tell him we must pay 100,000 dragons, and we will return the Kingslayer to him piece by piece, and then we shall have his gold. We shall deliver her to Jaime Carstark, and collect the maiden too. A roar of laughter went up from the brave companions. A fine plan, said Roose Bolton, the same way he might say a fine wine to a dinner companion. Though Lord Carstark will not be giving you his daughter. King Rob has shortened him by a head for treason and murder. As to Lord Tywin, he remains at King's Landing, and he will stay until the new year, when his grandson takes to bride a daughter of Highgarden.
Yeah, so I think this is all pretty good. This is kind of catching up to where they are in the novel. That's one of the things Martin kind of has to work at, is trying to figure out where these characters are in the timeline. And also it's really fun to see a contrast between Bolton and Vargo Hote, where Bolton is just quiet and in control. And we see again,
I love the line, a fine plan, he says, like he would say a fine wine. There's just like zero fucks given from Roose Bolton.
Yeah, he
He's one of
absolutely
those
does not get it.
one
And
of those
again, we
really
see
bad
here that
characters that you kind of like because he's
oh, I
so
love Bolton. He's so cool. He's
weird
like the best. He's great.
and
Um
unsettling.
and then yeah, and then also we see here that like Fargo Hoat doesn't really understand the political situation here. Like he's kind of a fool in certain ways. In that he's going to try to double cross the Lannisters, which is like an insane thing to do
He
in a
has an
small continent.
Essos kind of logic where you can just hold someone hostage infinitely, and
Mm-hmm.
and the enemy is not a united front because he underestimates the power that the Lannisters hold in the West, that they can turn pretty much the entire tide of the war. So he just thinks that Tywin is one man he can extort for coin,
Mm-hmm.
and then he can just sell off Jaime to someone else.
And there's also in the free cities, there's a kind of thing where these mercenary bands are um, allowed to continue to operate even after they've worked for another city. So there's a certain amount of like,
Mm.
oh, we hire them, somebody else hires them, whatever. We keep them around because they're useful. Whereas
Yeah,
here,
it's
like
it's
Tywin is,
mostly all city states, whereas
yeah,
here there
it's
is one kingdom and one king's law, and you can't really escape it.
yeah, exactly. And also just the culture is different in terms of like you don't fuck with the nobility in this culture. Like
Indeed.
that is a different thing than doing it to like some
Yeah.
cheese merchant king or whatever.
Yeah, and the sellswords are, as you say, much more culturally just accepted. No one holds grudges if Lice hires them one year and they do bad things, and then Mer might hire them and they do bad things. But it's not feudal and it's not generational in the same way it is in Westeros.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that's kind of an interesting cultural difference, and it makes sense then that to bring in Vargo Hoat to do it versus having like just a some lord in Westeros do it, where it really would just be like an insane thing for him to do. Um Oh, okay. Winterfell, said Brienne. You mean Winterfell. King Joffrey is betrothed to Sansa Stark. No longer. The Battle of the Blackwater changed all. The Rose and the Lion joined there to shatter Stannis Baratheon's host and burn his fleet to ashes. I warned you, Erswick, Jaime thought, and you, Goat. When you bet against the Lions, you lose more than your purse. Is there word of my sister? He asked. She is well, as is your nephew. Bolton paused before he said nephew, a pause that said, I know. Your brother also lives, though he took a wound in the battle. He beckoned to a dour Northman in studded brigantine. Escort Sir Jaime to Qyburn, and unbind this woman's hands. As the rope between Brienne's wrists was slashed in two, he said, Pray forgive us, my lady. In such troubled times it is hard to know friend from foe. Brienne rubbed her wrist where the hemp had scraped her skin bloody. My lord, these men tried to rape me. Did they? Lord Bolton turned his pale eyes on Vargo Hoat. I am displeased by that, and this of Sir Jaime's hand. There were 5 Northmen and as many Freys in the yard for every brave companion. The goat might not be as clever as some, but he could count that high at least. He held his tongue. They took my sword, Brienne said, my armor. And again, we just see here that like Bolton is like, this was a dumb fuck thing to do. But also I love this like nephew a pause because he knows. Because Bolton is very like, he's so intelligent in terms of knowing who the political situation. He's like,
But
he's a great character in that
he's
way.
had the bird. He's had Stannis' bird by now. But it's also one of those
You're right.
secrets that people, he might be willing to believe it just because it suits him. But Bolton is also a very cold fish, a very cool,
Yeah,
cunning sort.
calculating. How much
Hmm.
longer is this chapter?
It's a bit with Qyburn when he cauterizes Jaime's hand.
Do we
It's
want
not much.
to? Do we want to finish it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. All right, you can go ahead and start. Yeah, you can go
Go
ahead and
here.
start.
You shall have no need of armour here, my lady, Lord Bolton told her. In Harrenhal you are under my protection. Amabel, find suitable rooms for the Lady Brienne. Walton, you will see to Sir Jaime at once. He did not wait for an answer, but turned and climbed the steps, his fur-trimmed coat swelling behind. Jaime had only enough time to exchange a quick look with Brienne before they were marched away, separately. In the master's chambers, beneath the rookery, a grey-haired fatherly man called Qyburn sucked in his breath when he cut away the linen from the stumps of Jaime's hand. "That bad? Will I die?" Qyburn pushed the wound with a finger and wrinkled his nose at the gush of pus. "No, well, in a few more days." He sliced away Jaime's sleeve. "The corruption has spread. See how tender the flesh is. I must cut it all away. The safest course would be to take the arm off." "Then you will die," Jaime promised. "Clean up the stump and sew it up. I'll take my chances." Qyburn frowned. "I can leave you the upper arm, make the cut at your elbow, but take any part of my arm and you'd best chop off the other bones as well, or I'll strangle you with it afterward." Qyburn looked in his eyes. Whatever he saw there gave him pause. "Very well, I will cut away the rotten flesh, no more. Try to burn out the corruption with boiling wine and a poultice of nettle, mustard seeds, and bread mould. Perhaps that will suffice. It is on your head. You will want milk of the poppy." "No." Jaime dare not let himself be put to sleep. He might be short an arm when he woke, no matter what the man said. Qyburn was taken aback. There will be pain." "I'll scream. A great deal of pain. I'll scream very loudly." "Will you take some wine, at least?" "Does the High Septern ever pray?" "Of that I am not certain. I shall bring the wine. Lie back. I must needs strap down your arm." With a bowl and a sharp blade, Qyburn cleaned the stump, while Jaime gulped down the strong wine, spilling it all over himself in the process. His left hand did not seem to know how to find his mouth, but there was something to be said for that. The smell of wine in his...
Yeah, so Qyburn is a great character. And this is our first introduction to him. Later on, he'll become like the mad scientist of Westeros. And I think he's just a fun character, and this is a good introduction to him in that he seems unassuming, but at the same time, you're like, oh, okay, there's a little bit more under the surface that can come up.
He seems very professional, I think. I actually like Qyburn.
I like Qyburn too.
He isn't inherently wrong. Like, he just wants to do weird experiments. Just leave him alone.
Oh, that's funny. Hope to Dust says conflicts in Essos just don't feel as personal as the conflicts in Westeros. In Essos, it's the price of doing business, while the war in Westeros is very much based in existing grudges. Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think it also has to do with the fact that it seems like the free cities are very like the cities never get sacked. All the rich people are in the city. And so like everything is kind of like, oh, well, the property holdings outside of the city. Whereas in Westeros, like lords actually go into battle and can die, and they hold a very specific piece of land. And so, yeah, that's true. It's much more personal than in Essos, where it's just like, all right, we're sending some money out here and there.
Yeah, Westeros is much more about legacy. Like every man in Westeros is writing the legacy that he will hand down to his offspring for generations to go on. So every slight against him is a slight against him personally. Whereas,
yeah, exactly.
In Essos, they're traders. It's trade. It's commerce.
It's business.
It's just business. Just good business.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Business. That is a difference between the two. All right. Also, this is just such a gross scene with the pus and the stump. And I also like that Jaime is like, yeah, no, you don't get to, like, my arm is mine. I don't want any more of it gone.
Yeah, and don't you dare give me milk of the poppy. Who knows what you'll cut off when I'm asleep. It's really funny. I like how abruptly funny Martin will be with he'll just drop little jokes in here and there and you'll never see it coming. It's wonderful.
You know, it's something that I was thinking about in relation to the Locked Tomb trilogy and the way they do dialogue. Like, this is a an exchange that is at times a little funny, but also is like, will you take some wine at least, which is like a very back to kind of practical matters. Like it feels like a real conversation somebody would have, whereas in Locked Tomb there's more of a theatricality about the banter, even if it's a very good theatricality. And I think that's kind of just it just struck me as a little bit of a difference in how you can write banter. Whereas if you had something like Akatar, you would have just terrible banter in all ways. So we have three places along.
Constant quipping, and it's never
God.
good.
It's always the worst.
I must admit, I didn't finish Gideon the Ninth because it goes a little too theatrical for my taste. Like it kills my sense of immersion. But I do appreciate when it's served up in little slices because that is how it is in real life. Like most of the best jokes you'll ever make are the ones where you don't intend to make a joke.
Yeah, and the thing is,
Well,
with those books, I enjoy them, but yeah, I could see how the theatricality is very off-putting at times. Yeah, you can tell Thea isn't here because we're not getting a bunch of comments on the live stream. So,
I mean,
um,
I will fight for my opinion of the Locked Tomb, and it's entirely subjective. I admit that.
it's interesting because we're gonna be rereading the first book at some point when the next one gets like almost released, and I'm curious to see how well it holds up. So,
Are you
all right,
going
go.
to do
Let's
it
go.
for just you guys?
No, we'll probably do it as like a mid-month.
Oh no. Okay.
You
I'll
don't
to read
have
it
to
then.
read the mid-months.
I have to read it then. You know, unless I'm sick or dying or too busy, I will read everything. And I will complain. Anyway.
uh,
His sodden beard helped disguise the stench of pus. Nothing helped when the time came to pare away the rotten flesh. Jamie did scream then, and pounded the table with his good fist, over and over again. He screamed again when Kyburn poured the boiling wine over what remained of his stump. Despite all his vows and all his fears, he lost consciousness for a time. When he woke, the maester was sewing his arm with needle and catgut. I left a flap of the skin to fall back over your wrist. You have done this before, muttered Jamie weakly. He could taste blood in his mouth where he had bitten his tongue. No man who serves with Vago Hout is a stranger to stumps. He makes them wherever he goes. Kyburn did not look a monster, Jamie thought. He was sparse and soft-spoken, with warm brown eyes. How does a maester come to ride with the brave companions? The citadel took my chain. Kyburn put away his needle. I should do something about that wound above your eyes while the flesh is badly inflamed. Jamie closed his eye and let the wine and Kyburn do their work. Tell me of the battle. As keeper of Harrenhal's... Oh, tell me of the battle. As keeper of Harrenhal's ravens, Kyburn would have been the first to hear the news. Lord Stannis was caught between your father and the fire. It's said that the imp set the river itself aflame. Jamie saw green flames reaching up into the sky higher than the tallest towers as burning men screamed in the streets. I have dreamed this before. It was almost funny, but there was no one to share the joke. Open your eye. Carbon soaked a cloth in warm water and dabbed.
sorry. This part I find very funny. It's like it's a good little Easter egg for later that you'll understand at one point. Like you'll understand it on reread, but at the time you just kind of think he's addled by the wine. And it's the whole like that there's a bunch of the about how like King's
He's
Landing
going to tell
is.
that story in the next chapter, which I think we're going to do, right?
Yeah, we'll do the next chapter because the next chapter, not today, but next time, because the next chapter is like it's so good. It's such a good
So
chapter.
anyone who's interested in this, remember this joke. Like he thinks about
Green flames
higher than the tallest tower, burning men screaming in the streets, and I have dreamt of this before. It's significant. We'll get the story later.
Yeah, we'll see what that is about.
No, he dabbed the cloth at the crust of dried blood. The eyelid was swollen, but Jamie found he could force it open halfway. Kyburn's face loomed above. How did you come? Oh, right. How did you come by this one? The maester asked. A wench's gift. Rough wooing, my lord? This wench is bigger than me and uglier than you. You'd best see to her as well. She'd be limping from the leg I pricked when we fought. I will ask for her. What is this woman to you? My protector. Jaime had to laugh, no matter how much it hurt. I'll grind some herbs for you to mix with the wine to bring down your fever. Come back on the morrow, and I will put a leech on your eye to drain the bad blood. A leech. Lovely. Lord Bolton is very fond of leeches, Cybin said primly. Yes, said Jaime, he would be.
Bam. End of the chapter. It's such a good chapter because, and it's funny because it's shorter than I remember. It like I don't know, like especially because half the chapter is actually once they get to Harrenhal, pretty much. But it's such a good way of it gets into how Martin writes kind of like the fever dream sequences that he writes that are kind of surreal at times, and I just really like it. I think it's good. I think it's a good arc to Jaime. It starts to complicate him, and it's where he starts to be forced to be more than just the Kingslayer.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we don't often talk about, that I think Martin does very well, is that he has a very seamless way of transitioning between scenes.
Yes.
Like
yes.
time will just flow by, and you'll never notice. You'll never really feel the passage of time, but you will have a sense of it. Like usually a writer will try to instill the sense of time passing by saying, oh, this many days passed, or they will do a really really rough transitioning to another scene to make the plot move forward. Whereas with Martin, we just kind of glide through time in a way that is very realistic.
Yeah, it's true. And he kind of links them through ideas so that you don't notice the transition from one to the next. Like, like it took Brienne 2 days to ask him the question. And so like there's a sense of the time, but it's also like you're following an idea through it. And so it comes off like very seamless as a transition. Martin just really is very good at writing in many ways. I know like people are like
technically very good. I mean, you might have qualms with his content, but on a technical level, he is very proficient and very to the point.
Well, and he's just very skilled. It's because I always hear people be like, "Well, the prose are workmanlike," and it's like, no, there are so many aspects to prose that are more than just beautiful descriptions or even more just like flowery descriptions that he is able to effectively use. And so that's one of the things that I've really come to realize doing this is just how good he is at those kinds of things and how underrated those are as skills as a writer.
Yeah. I can totally understand people not being able to get into these books and digest them because it's just too many characters, too many names, too many places. What is happening where and when is it happening? If that is not your cup of tea, I can understand why this just is a mountain that you don't want to climb.
A mountain that rides. No, I'm also the same way. I would never suggest these to people who don't want, like, they're long books. Like, you know what I mean? They're huge books. Sometimes the quality can vary somewhat. You have to be on, like, thematically his level. You have to be okay with the way he's going to look at, like, oppression and stuff like that. But I think the way he's written the books is really masterful. If you can get on board with the basic idea of them.
Exactly. Like, a writer can be technically very skilled, very good, but the book might still not be to your taste. And you might love a book in which the craft of writing isn't technically very good. I mean, the liking something is subjective, whereas the quality of something is more objective. I would say it's 100% objective, but in many ways it is.
I would, and the objective is to please me. No, I'm just kidding. I do think that we'll get into at some point
how
I
think...
do
that where you're Jesus as well.
And I suffer for all of your sins by
I
reading
think
bad
we've been on
books.
stream for long enough for it to kind of go to your head.
All right. Yeah, next month we will be doing the chapter after this, which is really interesting and is I actually kind of thought was at the end of this chapter. I couldn't quite remember because they're so linked. But yeah, and then next week we will be doing the reread. And if you would like to join in on that, it should be. I think we're going to be doing it a little bit. I think we're going to either be doing it at like 11 or 12 EST because Valerie is very lazy and won't get up early. But we'll see.
Let's not blame Valerie. I very much prefer a later time as well, because I work nights. And it's
Yes,
afternoon
and she
time
has a
here,
lot.
so I need to wake up. I need to wash off the general appearance of being a troll, so I can appear here.
Okay, Val said
10
10 her
a.m. my
time, so
time.
that's like that should be 1 o'clock EST.
Yes.
So that will be fine. We'll see how many of us
you're
dress.
Here, Val. You can just rein Will in when he starts spinning away to his own.
I couldn't remember. I think Lindbergh will be wearing a costume. I think Courtney will be having a wine glass. Maybe I'll wear a costume. We'll see. But what costume are you planning?
Will, you want to wear a costume? Admit it.
There's nothing to see. Like, you see this much of the costume, so unless I'm like wearing a helm, it doesn't.
Wear pauldrons.
I guess.
Yeah.
I could wear a chainmail hoodie like Shad. Or
come on, you can be fun if you really want to. You just have to try.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Thank you for joining us. We will talk to you all later.